Picture this, you've just discovered the perfect home, but there's a twist. It's occupied by tenants. Sounds simple, right? Think again, because in Ontario, tenants have the legal right to stay put during their lease, and as the new owner, you'll have to honor their existing lease agreement. Whether you're dreaming of moving in yourself or an investor expanding your portfolio, buying a tenanted property brings its own set of complications. While it may be challenging, it's not impossible. Stick with me because in this video, I'll reveal essential strategies to help you navigate a potentially tricky process and avoid any pitfalls. This is information you absolutely need to be aware of, so let's dive in. Number one, understand tenant rights and review the lease agreements. First and foremost, you need to understand tenant rights. In Ontario, tenants have significant protections under the Residential Tenancies Act. This means that when you buy a property with existing tenants, you inherit their lease agreements and all the legal responsibilities that come with them. Tenants are protected from unlawful evictions and rent increases, and they have the right to stay in the property until their lease expires unless they agree to leave earlier. When reviewing lease agreements, look for the length of the lease term, the rent amount, payment history, and any clauses related to property maintenance. This information will give you a clear picture of what you're getting into and help you plan your finances. Also, ensure there are no clauses that might complicate your future plans for the property. Remember, tenants have the right to stay until their lease expires, and any attempt to force them out prematurely can result in legal issues. Now, let's move on to the scenarios you might face if you want to move into the property yourself and need vacant possession. Number two, if you want to move in. If you're buying a property to live in and not assuming the tenants, this process varies depending on the type of tenancy. It's important to include your need for vacant possession in the contract offer to purchase the property. Clearly state the property must be vacant for you to occupy by the closing date. Let's explore the different scenarios you might face and how you can navigate them during the offer process before you even become the new owner. Scenario 1. You want to move into the property, but the tenant is currently in a 1-year lease agreement. If a tenant is in a 1-year lease agreement, you are required to honor the lease until it expires, and the tenant is under no obligation to move. However, if you as a buyer want to use the property as your new home before the lease ends, the seller and their realtor will need to play a pivotal role in making this happen. They can negotiate with the tenant to see if they're willing to move out early. This negotiation might involve offering incentives like covering their moving costs or helping them find a new place to live. If the tenant agrees, ensure they have this agreement in writing and it's shared with you before you sign on the dotted line. The seller and their realtor should use an N11 form, which is a provincial document used when there is a mutual agreement between the tenant and the landlord to end the tenancy. This form is used when both the landlord and the existing tenant agree to terminate the lease early. It's essential to handle this process delicately to maintain good relations and ensure legal compliance. Scenario 2. You want to move into the property, but the tenant is in a month-to-month tenancy. For tenants who are in a month-to-month tenancy, you have more flexibility as a buyer. In Ontario, a month-to-month tenancy can be ended with 60 days notice under the correct circumstances. If you need vacant possession, the seller can give them a notice of termination on your behalf. This notice must be in writing using an N12 form. The N12 form is used when the landlord, a buyer, or a family member of the buyer would like to move into the property for their own use. This form must be filled out correctly, explaining why they need the tenants to vacate, and provide to the tenants with the standard minimum requirement of 60 days notice. The notice period must align with the end of the existing rental period that is in place. Additionally, the landlord must compensate the tenant with an amount equivalent to 1 month's rent or offer another rental unit acceptable to the tenant. The seller and their realtor must ensure that the N12 form is properly completed and delivered to the tenant. They should also prepare for potential negotiations as tenants might request additional time or compensation for moving out. Communication is key to ensuring a smooth transition and maintaining a good relationship with the tenant. As the buyer, it's important to understand that you don't own the property yet, and therefore you are not the landlord. This means you cannot directly negotiate with the tenant or issue notices until the property transaction is complete. All actions regarding the tenants must be conducted by the seller and their realtor until the property officially changes hands. In both scenarios, clear communication and cooperation between the buyer, seller, and their agents are essential to meet the buyer's needs while respecting the tenant's rights. Number 3, if you decide to become a landlord. Deciding to become a landlord can be a fantastic investment, but it sure does come with its own set of responsibilities and decisions. Make sure you understand exactly what you're getting into and educate yourself on the landlord and tenant provincial rules, regulations, and guidelines in Ontario so you're not blindsided in the upcoming scenarios. Let's get into the multiple situations you may need to navigate as a landlord. Scenario 1: you decide to become a landlord and keep the existing tenants. If the current tenants are reliable and you're satisfied with the lease terms, you might choose to keep them. Ensure you have a good understanding of their payment history and any existing agreements. You can only increase rent annually by the provincially mandated percentage, which is 2.5% for 2024. Look out for any maintenance issues or complaints they might have had and address them promptly to maintain a good landlord tenant relationship. Regular communication and being responsive to their needs can help ensure a smooth tenancy. Scenario 2: you decide to become a landlord and want to find new tenants. If you buy a tenant occupied property and decide to find new tenants due to dissatisfaction with the existing ones, or because the rent is below market rate, you may consider offering the current tenants a cash for keys arrangement to vacate early. This involves providing a financial incentive for them to leave, making it easier to renovate or adjust the rent. You'll use an N11 form for this, which is used when both parties have an agreement to terminate the tenancy, ensuring everything is documented. Be aware that finding reliable new tenants involves thorough background checks and understanding the market rental rates. If you have family or a caregiver who needs to move in, you'll need to utilize the N12 form, which is again a provincial document just like the N11, which is used to notify tenants when the landlord requires the property for their own use. This form must clearly state the purpose of the move and ensure the tenants are given at least 60 days notice. The notice must also align with the end of the existing rental period, and compensation equivalent to 1 month's rent is required to be given along with. Scenario 3: you decide to become a landlord and want to make renovations. If you buy a tenant occupied property and decide to undertake renovations to improve the space or increase appreciation, you'll need to use an N13 form to give the tenants notice. This form is a provincial document used by landlords who intend to demolish, renovate, or convert a rental unit and requires the tenants to be given at least 120 days notice before the end of the lease period. Tenants must be compensated with 3 months of rent or offered another suitable rental unit. Budget for these repairs carefully and factor in the time it will take to complete them before you start looking for new tenants. Make sure any new renovations that you make comply with local regulations and do not infringe on tenant rights. Scenario 4: making rent increases as a landlord. As a landlord, it's imperative that you are aware of the provincial guidelines for rent increases. In Ontario, there are strict rules on how and when you can increase the rent. For a standard procedure, use the N1 form to notify your tenants. The guideline increase for 2024 is capped at 2.5%, but there are exceptions for new builds or properties with significant renovations. Notice must be given at least 90 days in advance. Familiarize yourself with these regulations to ensure compliance and avoid disputes. Most importantly, if you're buying a property that is not rent controlled, such as those built after November 15th, 2018, you do have more flexibility with rent increases. However, it's still important to be fair and transparent with your tenants to maintain a good relationship. Finally, at the end of this list, at number 4 is conducting a thorough property inspection. Last but not the least, conducting a property inspection is a must. Whether you plan to move in or assume tenants, ensure the property is well maintained and any necessary repairs are accounted for. Pay close attention to structural elements, your plumbing, electrical systems, and any signs of damage or wear and tear. This inspection is crucial for budgeting your repair costs and avoiding unexpected expenses down the line. Consider the potential expense of bringing the property up to your standard and including this in your financial planning. Buying a property with tenants is certainly more tricky to navigate than a property that is vacant. Whether the end goal is to use it as your own residence or a rental property, there are a multitude of circumstances that can be challenging without the right awareness and understanding of the real estate market. Hopefully, after this video, you'll be well equipped to make an informed decision before you decide to bite the bullet. Thanks again for watching Property Ladder. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more real estate tips, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.